Insiders, an ASI media podcast that covers the issues that matter most to the promotional products industry. This is Chris Ruvo for ASI Media. Today, I'll be speaking with Counselor's 2021 Person of the Year, Jonathan Isaacson. As CEO chairman of top 40 supplier Gemline, Jonathan was already one of the most well-known and influential executives in the promotional products industry. But in 2020, amid the darkest days of the COVID-19 pandemic, Jonathan's performance as a brilliant leader for his company, the industry, and his community was virtually without peer in promo. For one thing, Jonathan spearheaded Gemline's remarkable pivot to being an industry leader in PPE, helping put products into the hands of people who desperately needed them, while also saving countless distributors as traditional sales evaporated. Jonathan was also at the heart of deeply impactful public health initiatives, from guiding local task forces to getting vaccines to people in his community. He also took a key role promoting industry education aimed at combating COVID. We're here today to talk about all that and more. Jonathan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's jump into this first question. Take us back to early 2020. When did you sense that COVID would be a problem, and what was your response?
The first time we realized that it might be an issue was when I was in Dusseldorf at the PSI show, and that was really the talk of the town. And little did we realize then how much it was spreading. And frankly, what we thought at the time was this was going to be something that was localized, which is a regional event. We had no idea it was going to become the pandemic that it turned into until early March, when it was very clear what was going to be happening.
All right. And what was your response at that time in March? If I recall, there were some folks in your health from the healthcare from your network that work in healthcare that reached out to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So we've been involved as a company in a lot of different regional healthcare institutions and some global ones. But I got a call from one of the big Harvard teaching hospitals. Actually, it was an email from two very senior people in early March who were in a pretty desperate situation in that they were running short of critical PPE. And they asked if we could help. And it was not a business that we were familiar with. It was not a product line that we were familiar with. But what we knew how to do was to vet a factory, to find a quality product, to make sure it was made in a way that was reasonable, in a quality way, and we knew how to transport it. And so we started to build an organization around it. It started with me, and 3 weeks later, we had probably around 70 people working in that product category trying to move goods. We had a few advantages. One is that we had boots on the ground in China that we could mobilize. And we also had access to labs and to quality individuals. And around that time, what we also did was we added to our people inside, our professional staff. This was on a contract basis, hiring an epidemiologist, a microbiologist, an industrial hygienist, and a few other people to help us make sure that what we were getting met the specs that it was supposed to. And I will tell you, it was a very stressful time. We ended up sending a lot of merchandise into channels and verticals where people were really in desperate need of the merchandise. And so every morning we would get calls desperately looking for PPE, and you knew that there was high risk on the other side. So it was long days, it was weekends, and it was a lot of stress. But in the end, we delivered tens of millions of units, and not one unit was returned because it didn't meet the specification. So we delivered in the end.
Yeah, hugely important. And it's interesting that you mentioned about Gemline's supply chain, the way that you have boots on the ground, as you say. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and how that helped this? Really, what was it? I mean, this was a whole shift. This was into a business you had never been a part of before, right? So it happened in a matter of weeks. So can you tell us about the role it played there?
Well, there was there were a lot of bad players at the time who were
Mm-hmm.
operating in the space. They came up very, very quickly. In fact, it was
Mm-hmm.
amazing how quickly bad actors found the space and started to do business there. So what we said in the beginning is that we have our foundational way of going to market, how we bring products to market,
Mm-hmm.
and we were going to follow our guidelines no matter what happened. So that if we couldn't go in a factory and vet a factory, then we would not do business with the factory. So we would pull up to a factory somewhere and then say, oh, you can't come in, or oh, we're busy. That was it. If we couldn't come in and inspect, then we didn't do business with those factories. And what we would do is we would go in, we would test, we would station people in the factory to make sure that we were getting what we were supposed to be getting.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes this took some time, but it made sure that the product that was delivered to us was the right product. And probably one of the best examples of this was sanitizer, something that we're all swimming in these days.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
way back when, nobody could find sanitizer. And so when we went into the sanitizer factory, we got the list of ingredients, and then we tested to make sure that those were actually the ingredients before we bought the sanitizer, and then we watched the fill happening. And we did this with the support of our team that we're able to access. These are the experts that we brought on board to help make sure that what we were buying met all the requirements for safety and efficacy.
Yeah, and I think that was so hugely important, and probably not probably, definitely a reason that Gemline had as much success as you did in 2020 selling PPE, because you knew if you were a distributor ordering from Gemline that you were getting a product that had been vetted for safety, and that I think one distributor described it. It was the Wild West, with PPE in the early days, and Gemline provided that stability and that assurance that they were not going to go sell an end client something that was then going to be under recall or something dangerous, so that was huge. And I think that played such a huge role, right, in Gemline increasing sales last year, which is another feat I didn't even mention in the introduction, but that Gem was up last year as well,
We
right?
had an unbelievable year last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually continued and increased, in fact, this year. But I do want to say one thing. It wasn't one pivot. It
Mm-hmm.
was a series of pivots that we did. So there was bulk PPE that we did, the masks, the sanitizers, the gowns, the other products that we sold. And then there was the imprinted products that got sold into the traditional channel,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And then there were things like soap and first aid kits and new licenses that we put together with new brand partners. There were a lot of things that we did all at once. We increased the amount of machinery on the floor and upgraded machinery. We did all of this in the middle of the pandemic. We were only shut down for 2 weeks, and then we started running again as an essential business in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, probably one of the things that we're most proud of last year is that we did not have one case of transmission within our facility. And we had a person almost full time, basically it was full time, doing contact tracing. So
Okay.
when you came in, we knew who you were driving in with. We knew basically everything about people's movements, and we were tracking them. And we were arranging for testing, and we were setting up barriers. This is where the industrial hygienist, that's one of the things they're very helpful with, and frankly, the epidemiologist as well, to be able to design a facility where people can come in and be safe. And we ended up being the master of the clear shower curtain. So you could literally hang a clear shower curtain between two workstations.
Mm-hmm.
I can see you, I can talk to you, we're both masks, but I am protected from you between the workstations. So there was both space, and sometimes it was blue side, but a lot of times we use clear shower curtains. It was just a brilliant idea. And there were a lot of things like that we implemented into the facility to make sure that people were safe.
Yeah, and that's just lay it out for everybody, because I'm not sure everybody's familiar with the story. The Standards of Care Committee, I'm probably getting the name exactly wrong, but you had these professionals in the various fields that you mentioned there come in and kind of guide you. Hey, this is what you should be doing to keep people safe. Can you talk about how that came about and just what exactly that committee is or was?
So I have been connected to my alma mater, the University of Michigan, for some time, and started doing some industry education, and did it with the chair of the Department of Epidemiology at the University of Michigan School of Public Health.
Mm-hmm.
And there are clearly other schools of public health. There's a couple of famous ones in Cambridge, but I had, which I also have some connections to. We as an organization have some connections to, and have done some work with. But we really like these people at the University of Michigan. And so I talked to the chair of the department and said, would like to put together a standard of care committee. And we talked about what would be important as we put that committee together. And we talked about an industrial hygienist who's concerned with safety at work. We talked about the microbiologist, and she was working on, with a team of physicists and other professionals in a variety of other fields, on N95 masks and how do you recycle them. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on, and I won't get into why there are physicists involved, but it does make sense on all of this when you understand how these masks really work. And what we did is we talked to them about what was the state of the art in terms of how the virus was transmitting. We talked to them about what was the state of the art in terms of how the PPE works and how you keep people safe. And then we provided that education out into the industry as it came along. And it worked, phenomenally well. They were incredibly helpful to us in making sure that the facility was safe and that the product that we were putting out there met the proper standards. And what we said is, during the pandemic, we have our basic values, and we wanted to come through the pandemic as a stronger company if we could, but we weren't going to trade out our values to do that. And we were very clear with people in terms of what the order of operations was, and that our values were critical to who we were, who we are, who we're going to be in the future. And so that was really important as we thought about how we were going to deal with both the people internally and how we went to market. And we had a lot of sayings like, come in healthy, go home healthy, lots of stuff that we had around the facility so that everybody understood that everything else you were working on, safety is our first priority, our second priority, and now the whole team that's listening to me would say, and our third priority, because they heard it so many times. And it's old news, but at the time, I mean, everybody remembers what a crazy time this was. Nobody really understood completely how this thing spread like they do today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Even we're not even removed from it yet, but we're further along away from the worst of it, we hope. And just thinking back to then, it's incredible. It was an incredible time, and continues to be an incredible time that we're living through. But you mentioned something there that was interesting, because it speaks to another component of why you won this Person of the Year award. You mentioned values, and I know values are very important to Gemline, and a lot of that stems from you and your own personal values, how you like to conduct yourself. And I think it's led you to be part of task forces in your community, various boards, and a lot of those were community focused and then healthcare focused. Can you tell us a little bit about that community involvement and how through those activities you became involved with fighting COVID-19 in your community there in Lawrence, Massachusetts?
So I've been involved with a local hospital for a while, which was one of the central resources in terms of dealing with COVID. We had one of the highest rates of COVID in this area in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So both the hospital and the health center that's here became critical in terms of treating people who had COVID, as well as doing testing. There's also an economic development group. It's a private-public partnership that's aimed at improving the lives of the people in the city of Lawrence through economic development. And at that time, we decided to form a COVID-19 task force, which I ended up chairing. It started as our goal was to stop the spread, which proved impossible. And then it really ended up being around education. And then in the end, assisting some people in setting up vaccine clinics within their facilities. Now, this has now sort of gone back to education, because if you want to, around here, if you want a vaccine clinic in your facility, that is something that is much easier to do, is there's plenty of available vaccine. When we started doing this, supplies were much tighter, and we did a bunch of things as a part of the task force. We provided education to the, let's call it the consumers, to people in the community, about the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine and the fact that it's free, and tried to battle some of the rumors about the vaccine. But we also got some prominent doctors in the area together to do a webinar for HR people, so they would be better prepared in terms of how to answer questions for people in their own facility about the vaccine, how it works, and just to help people become more comfortable in terms of vaccination. So there was a lot of other activity. It's frankly hard to remember everything that we did. It was a very crazy time, but we have been extraordinarily fortunate at Gemline. I mean, we had a really amazing year. Our distributor partners really supported us in a very powerful way, both last year and this year. Mm-hmm. And part of what we've always believed in as a company is the requirement to give back into the community. So it wasn't just the healthcare folks, it was people like the Boys and Girls Club. Mm-hmm. And in the city of Lawrence, the Boys and Girls Club, which is really an amazing, amazing organization, is the place that kids went, even during the pandemic, who had frontline, whose parents were frontline workers, through the whole COVID pandemic, and they needed a safe place to go, a place that they could get a meal, or just a place they could get a meal. Mm-hmm. And places like the Boys and Girls Club, and there are other places that did just amazing work during this time, they needed the support of the community. So during this whole time, we supported them, as we always have, but we were fortunate enough to be able to increase our support during this time. Their work
that's another thing I was going to anticipate one of my questions, actually, which is that Gemline has always done a lot of charitable giving. It's something that I know that you've been uncomfortable talking about in the past publicly, because you kind of see that as not the reason for why you do it. You're not doing it to get public accolades. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But this past year, you really stepped up that giving, I think, to record levels by company standards. Can you talk beyond Boys and Girls Club? What were some of the causes that Gemline supported over the last year?
There were a lot. It's hard to remember, frankly, without the list. But we were supplying local businesses with PPE, and as well as shelters and food pantries of various kinds. Mm-hmm. And I'll just give you three. Those are two. In terms of what we were doing. And the third one, which was important to us, is to support the Blaven Scholars Program back at the University of Michigan, which is a really interesting and amazing program. It's for foster kids who never get adopted. The numbers in terms of what happens to them, or the story of what happens to them after they turn 18 is really not very good. Okay. And the Blaven Scholars Program provides not only a scholarship program, but support throughout the year to help them get through the college experience. So a place to go for Thanksgiving, et cetera, and all sorts of social support. Amazing program. We set up a named scholarship in honor of a retiring board member who had done a lot for the company, and we felt great at the opportunity to give back to something that we felt was important, but for him, who is a lifelong educator, something that he felt was important also. So it was a win all around. We felt great doing it. We have never felt good about talking about our charitable giving. The situation has changed a little bit, because at this point in time, our distributor partners and the end users want to know that you're community engaged. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're community engaged here, we're community engaged globally. In some ways, we have been forced to talk about it a little bit more than we otherwise would. Mm-hmm. What we're hopeful is that our talking about it will encourage other people to get involved as well, because there is need in every community.
Yeah, well said. Now, Speaking of other kinds of outreach that you did, you'd alluded to this a bit earlier, but there was quite a bit of industry education that you participated in, or not participate, you spearheaded in a lot of ways. You were bringing in folks who are, the healthcare experts from your network, some of which you mentioned before. You were also leading some yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly you did and kind of why you did it?
So we are very fortunate as an organization to have deep relationships in a lot of different institutions. And we saw a need and an opportunity to provide information to our industry so that people could figure out what they needed to do to get through the pandemic. So one example was the Standard of Care Committee. We actually ran them a number of times, both inside the industry. We ran them in the community where we did webinars on, what do you need to do when you receive packages? And just all these questions that nobody knew the answer to at the time. We also brought in the former dean of the Harvard School of Public Health, a guy named Barry Bloom, who's a very famous immunologist, to talk about where the pandemic was going so people had an idea of what was going to happen from here. We brought in economists to try to get a sense of what was going to happen with the economy and, what are the big sectors where there's opportunity for people in the promo business. I believe that these are up on our website now if people want to consume them. Probably the most relevant today is still The Economist.
Sure.
We put that up there. And the good thing about him is he speaks English and it doesn't get lost in the jargon with economists.
Yeah. You don't need a PhD in international finance or whatever to understand
No,
it.
we just need somebody to tell us what things look like and there's opportunities, what sector. And there's lots of opportunities out there. There's no doubt about that.
All right. I want to get into that, particularly as it relates to promo in a moment. But there's one other thing I want to make sure that we hit on, because I'm not sure it came across clearly. You serve on the board at Lawrence General, right?
I do. Yep. This is my last year. That is correct.
All right. So that had to be an incredibly unique perspective. Working. I know that you're not, as you've emphasized to me in the past, you're not down in the hospital curing patients alongside the doctors or anything, but you were inside that world. What was that like at the beginning of COVID, and then as things kind of worsened?
That was sort of interesting to see how they thought about their business. But I live in a town with a lot of physicians and a lot of very senior level physicians.
Mm-hmm.
So I was seeing this through a variety of eyes, through the eyes of people who are running huge networks of doctors or cancer surgeons or whatever. They were going to work every day. If somebody is sick, they have to be able to go and get treated. And I have to say, for a lot of them, their business got hit like the promo business got hit. I mean, it was very, very difficult because elective surgeries are critical to the finances of a bunch of these institutions. So for healthcare, it was a very very frightening time. They were right in the middle of it. And especially in the beginning, if you think about what they had to do without enough PPE, what we did was nice. What they did was real courage, frankly. And it bothered me a lot that there were bad actors that were willing to sell product that didn't meet a standard to people who were leaving their family to go into the hospital every day.
Mm-hmm.
And every little while I would get spitting mad and have to sort of go for a walk to clear my head. But I wasn't doing the work. I was a fly on the wall for the people who were really doing the work, which was the doctors and the nurses and a lot of different institutions around Boston who did really just an incredible, incredible job. And it's not just the doctors and the nurses, if you think about it. It's the first responders. It's the people in the ambulances. It's the firemen. It's the police. It was a lot of people who were out there every day when a lot of people had the luxury of being able to stay home. They did not, and we really still owe them a debt of gratitude.
I think that's really well said. Let me totally shift gears here now to something else that you mentioned earlier about 5 or 6 pivots during the course of the year, and I think that's such a good point as to why Gemline had success. I know you and Frank were key to kind of spearheading that. And a big component of it, right, was these brand partnerships that Gemline formed. You never stopped. It wasn't like, okay, COVID's here, we're doing PPE, we'll resume promo business next year. Throughout the year, there was these new brand partnerships. There was an acquisition, I believe, as well of was it Rumi? I might
It
have
was a
that.
little before the pandemic for the
Yeah.
acquisition.
So there was just so much happening. Can you just talk a little bit about that and why you guys decided to stay proactive and continuing to pursue like that?
Well, first of all, um, this was a team effort. There is no doubt that nothing happens in Gemline without the team, and we have a really amazing team of people. I'm one guy. Frank is one guy. I think we both worked really hard during this time,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just two of us,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of people here doing just incredible work in terms of some of these partnerships, in terms of bringing the product to market, in terms of moving it at a time where it was not, and it's still not easy to move product.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was one of these things where one thing led to another, that as we started to think about the business, we understood that this was a real pivot point for the business and that we were going to have to reimagine who we were
Mm-hmm.
until things got back to normal. We knew that one day we would emerge from this, but there would be a space that we had to go through before some of the old stuff that we did came back to something resembling what it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really one thing led to another, both in terms of the brand partnerships, even with people like Osprey or some of these other ones like Modern Sprout. And again, there's a little bit of a blur.
Mm-hmm.
Before this interview, I didn't go through and say, oh, okay, who did we launch where?
Yeah.
It was move,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure everybody's safe, and make sure that that merchandise actually gets on a plane, gets through Chinese customs,
Mm-hmm.
gets through U.S. customs, that a truck can get in there to pick it up. I mean, everything was broken,
Mm-hmm.
but we managed to do it. And I will tell you that not everything went perfectly.
Sure.
That is for sure. I'm missing just a little bit of my stomach lining from some of the things that maybe did not go so perfectly. But the team stood up when it was important, and it's really less about me, I think, than about the team. I'm really, as you and I have talked about, really the front man for this.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people who really just did incredible work within the organization.
Very good. So I mentioned wanted to kind of touch on the economy before. Let's do that now. Let's talk about how you feel 2021 into 2022 is going to play out for not just Gemline, but also our industry as a whole. As you kind of mentioned, we are facing supply chain issues with getting stock from overseas to North America. That's obviously a huge challenge for everybody. But not just that issue. Let's talk about it all. Where's the 2021 and 2022 going for the promo industry and the economy as a whole, as far as you see it?
So I will start by saying, and I think Norman Cohn is going to be very surprised by this, but I'm very optimistic going forward.
Wait. Did you say optimistic? Yeah.
I am very optimistic going forward. What I think that where people get a little bit confused as I talk about this, I don't think that the business will be the same. I think necessarily it will be different, but different doesn't denote worse.
Mm-hmm.
Environments change, businesses change. One has to be able to pivot. And this industry is full of entrepreneurial people who have shown an ability to pivot. And a lot of companies have gotten through this time and will figure out what the new normal is.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be some sectors that are permanently impaired, and there'll be new sectors that come up that do very, very well. And there'll be sort of categories of product that's permanently impaired and categories that do very, very well. Let me give you an example of where a potential negative in the news turns into a big positive for this industry.
Okay.
So right now, if we talk to almost any employer across the country, you hear about labor shortages across a range of jobs. For this industry, that is a tremendous opportunity in terms of gifts for recruiting, thank you gifts for employees, gifts for frontline people. There's all sorts of affinity. Companies are going to be doing stuff for their team members to let them know that they appreciate them. Who is perfectly placed for that? The promo industry, with gifts of appreciation, with creative ways to say thank you to people. There's lots of opportunities here. So something that is no doubt a negative for most employers who are struggling to fill jobs, for us, is really an opportunity across almost every sector, in terms of being able to be the people who help companies to thank their team members and associates who work there, not to mention their customers. And there's going to be ample opportunity, especially as we go into the third and fourth quarter. We are extremely optimistic. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that we should be paying attention to. COVID is waning as we talk right now here in the United States, not gone. In other places, not so much. And, we're watching the humanitarian issue and we're watching the supply chain issues driven by this. But it doesn't mean that there is an opportunity here for us as a industry.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny as I was every day I read these articles about the labor shortage. You can't find people. A job that used to be $11 an hour, now they're going to pay you $16 an hour to do the same job. And I'm like, my gosh, I hope distributors are out there capitalizing on this, because there's so much to be that our industry, and not just make sales, that can viably do to help. Those things do. There's research shows that they viably do help with retention and with attracting employees and making them feel part of a team. So that's just that's an excellent example there, I think. Let me bottom line you real quick if I can. We were, as an industry, distributor sales were roughly a little over 20 billion last year. I think it was 20.7 billion according to our research. Do you think we surpassed that number this year? Does 2021 surpass what 2020 did?
I think we'll get close as an industry. I don't know. There's so many unknowns right now. I will tell you, this is a red hot economy in a lot of sectors. Some sectors are still impaired. Parts of hospitality are struggling. Parts of hospitality are knocking it out of the park. It depends what your business is, and frankly, where you're located regionally. And a lot of people have suffered during this time. But there is so much money sloshing through the economy. People want to be out and about. And so if you go to an airport, and I was flying in yesterday, it was a mob scene. And the airport was a mob scene. And people are going to do what I did. If you have older relatives you haven't seen, you're sort of scheduling out to go in and check in on all these people face to face if you haven't done it already.
Yeah.
And so you're flying and you see how busy things are. Go try to rent a car somewhere. It's absolute craziness right now. And so there's all this, with the economy being red hot, with our product being so useful at a time like this, I think there's an opportunity for us to come back. If it's not this year, it's probably next year. But I think that the business will shift. It will be different, but different doesn't mean worse. It means different, and different means opportunity.
I think that's a fantastic place to end it. Jonathan Isaacson, CEO, Chairman of Gemline, 2021 Counselor Person of the Year. Jonathan, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.